Hello, my name is James Prest. This is part 3 of Remarriage in the Case of Adultery. If you haven't watched the first 2 parts, do not watch this one. It will not make any sense. You can view the notes for this presentation at answersforadventists.wordpress.com. Click Resources, Resources, Studies, and it'll be a Google Doc link. It's called Divorce and Remarriage, and it will take you to a 66-page study on this topic. Again, I'm only covering the points of contention. Where I agree with reformers, I don't see the need to cover that. We just finished talking about the Monterey letter, about how it was inspired by God, how the rules and the laws that were given in it were generalized to not just that one person in the church, this was not just private instruction from the Lord to this individual. This was to be given to anyone in that same situation, because it said, or any other woman. Now let's go ahead and get into this. Reformers always bring up the weight of evidence statement, which says this, in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 3, 258 paragraphs. We'll just read this one. It's either 2 or 3, I don't know. But it says this: the unbelief that demands perfect knowledge will never yield to the evidence that God is pleased to give. He requires of his people faith that rests upon the weight of evidence, not upon perfect knowledge. So the unbelief that demands perfect knowledge will never yield to the evidence that God's pleased to give. Okay? God requires of his people faith that rests upon weight of evidence, not upon perfect knowledge. Now, I want to show you what exactly reformers do with this statement. So I figured that this would probably be the best way to do it, so I can get you the best view of what's going on. Okay, this right here, if you can see it, I know it's a little fuzzy, but this is what the SDARM puts as their weight of evidence box. They're like, okay, see, all these verses in the Bible say that divorce and remarriage is wrong. And they don't even put all these statements in here, but they'll put Matthew 19 verse 9 and the Monterey letter in there, and maybe Matthew 5 and in here, and they'll say, see, look, we have a weight of evidence. We have these 7 verses here, and these 2 verses here, and one spirit of prophecy statement, and they're like, see, we go with the weight of evidence. Therefore, there's no divorce and remarriage. This is what they say. Okay, now you'll notice over here, though, in this yes column, that Matthew 19 verse 9 is only for fornication or adultery. This is an exception. Romans 7 1 through 3 is only if your spouse dies, okay? And of course, Manuscript Releases Volume 17, again, that's only in the case of adultery. So what do you see here? They're like the weight of evidence. So you have 7 verses 3. And so they're like, see, there's no divorce or remarriage. Now let me show you my box. This is my box. Okay? There's a yes column and a no column and an exception column. The reason I did that is because Jesus never says you can divorce and remarry. He never says that. Okay? He specifically says you can't divorce and remarry, but he never says yes to yes, you can divorce and remarry. But he does give exceptions for special cases only. That's over here, okay? So Jesus never said, he does say, no, you can't divorce and remarry. There's verses that say that, okay? He never says you can divorce and remarry. What he does say is in special cases, in the exception of fornication, adultery, or death, then you can divorce and remarry. Okay? So Jesus did not contradict himself, that we have to pit his words against his words. God is not the author of confusion. The Bible's in harmony. And Ellen White says this. So we don't need to say, okay, Jesus and God said this so many times over here, and then he said this, a totally opposing view, and so we should go with the weight of evidence. This was an opposing view. This was not an opposing view. This was an exception. So it shouldn't go in the yes column, because that would make it against the no column, and the Bible's not in harmony anymore. Okay? Again, this is an exception, not an opposing view. So this box, yes, if we're to go by the weight of evidence, and this is really what the case is, that just like this box is, then yes, we should not divorce or remarry. End of story. But that's not quite a right representation of what we have here, because Jesus never, ever, ever said that you can divorce and remarry. He gave that exception for special cases only. So he never said divorce and remarry. So this is not out of harmony. Okay? So, what exactly is the weight of evidence against if the box looks like this? Well, it's against nothing. Jesus is all in harmony. If it's this box, granted, we should take the position of the Seventh-day Adventist Reform movement. But it's not. This is the case. Jesus gave an exception, not an opposing view. It's like in the Gospels, how you have in the Gospels these the different places where one Gospel will give more details concerning the same event or the same doctrine. Okay? Imagine that I took a verse in the Bible that makes it seem like Sunday is the Sabbath. Let's say I took a verse that made it seem that way. And say, okay, all these other verses are saying that the seventh day is the Sabbath. The Bible's not in harmony. No, the Bible is in harmony. It's just the way you're breaking it down that's not in harmony. Jesus he made it very clear there was to be no divorce and remarriage, with the exception of special cases. So he's just giving more details concerning the same topic. It's not that it's out of harmony. We don't need to pit the words of Jesus against the words of Jesus. It's an exception, not an opposing view. Now, I'm going to cover two main objections, and then I'll leave the other ones for the document I have online. Objection number one, you cannot base a doctrine off of one Bible verse. And they're referring to Matthew 19, verse 9. I'm not basing it off of one verse. There's Matthew 19, verse 9. There's Mount of Blessing 63, paragraph 1. And there's the Monterey letter. That's 3. But even if it was only Matthew 19, verse 9, we read in Testimonies for the Church, volume 7, 71, paragraph 1, she says, one sentence of Scripture is of more value than 10,000 of man's ideas or arguments. So I'm going to take Matthew 19, verse 9, that one sentence of Scripture, I think it's 2 actually, I'm going to take that and it's going to be more valuable to me than all man's ideas or arguments or attempts to make Jesus' words contradict themselves. Okay? That's the way I see it. If you say you can't base a doctrine off of one Bible verse, then we can take Daniel 8:14 away, which would mean you take away the only verse that establishes 1844, the only verse that gives you the 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, and you can throw away with that verse 1844, the date 1844, the beginning of the investigative judgment, majorly involving the sanctuary message. You can throw away the third angel's message, which began in 1844, majorly involving the mark of the beast and the Sabbath. You can throw away the beginning of the sealing work, majorly involving the 144,000. So if we can't base a doctrine off of one Bible verse, then the whole foundation of Adventism crumbles all to pieces. Okay? Now, this is the last objection, and I think it's a good one. Okay? This is the key objection. This is like their point when they present this. If all other ways of getting you to believe them fails, this is what they resort to. Some people go to it directly, and I think that's better because, if Matthew, for instance, if Matthew 19, verse 9 shouldn't be there, which is what some of reformers have told me, they'll say it was added or something, then you don't need to sit here and give me a 3-hour Bible study on what the verse means. Just say the verse doesn't exist. It's inharmonious to say the verse shouldn't be there, but here's what it means. That doesn't make any sense. If it's not there, you don't need an explanation for it. Okay, but let's look at this one. It's called God's permissive will. In other words, God permitted us to remarry in the case of adultery, but it wasn't His perfect will. That was only His permissive will, and we should seek to go back to the beginning. Okay? So in other words, and they give examples. For instance, divorce for uncleanness was permitted in Deuteronomy 24:1. It says that. Divorce was permitted. In Mark chapter 10, it's very plain from Jesus that it's no longer permitted. That is real. Light is progressive, okay? And this is basically the objection. The light is progressive, okay? They'll give you another example, swine's flesh, in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, 206, paragraph 3. She says basically these people were wanting to make it a test, and she says, no, you can't do that. Okay? So she didn't say it was right. She just said you can't make it a test, which is kind of, in a sense, permitting it. Okay? So again, it's permitted. And in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, 96, paragraph 2, it's very plain that it's against God's law. Okay? So again, the bill of divorcement, it's permitted. Jesus says it's no longer permitted. Swine's flesh is permitted. Testimonies Volume 2 says it's no longer permitted. And so they're like, remarriage in the case of adultery was permitted. And they bring up Matthew 19, verse 9 in the Monterey letter. And then they say, remarriage in the case of adultery is no longer permitted. And the logic is great. I love it. It is perfectly sound. The only problem with it is that in every example, the bill of divorce and the swine, they always show you a statement which directly says that that's no longer the case. However, in the case of remarriage, in the case of adultery being permitted, they give you the verse that says it was permitted, but they never give you the one that says it's no longer permitted. They'll try to bring up Testimonies for the Church, Volume 7, where it says marriage is a union for life. That's not out of harmony with what Jesus says. God is not the author of confusion. Marriage is a union for life, but Jesus says that man can put it asunder. Okay, let no one do that. And it can be put asunder by adultery, by dissoluting the marriage tie, by breaking wedlock. It can be done. It's wrong, it's sin, it's evil, but it can be done. So this is the grandest objection that there is, but the only problem is they have permitted, no longer permitted, permitted, no longer permitted, permitted. They never give you the example where it's no longer permitted. And I've asked many reformers to give me it, show me the statement. They can never do it. They try to bring up Testimonies Volume 7. Romans 7, I'm like, but Romans 7 is again talking about polygamy. None of it's out of harmony with what I'm teaching. They're saying the scriptures are out of harmony, or they give you this objection and they have a big hole in it because they never say where remarriage in the case of adultery is no longer permitted.